Hey everyone, and welcome to the Back Bridge Masterclass. Before we begin, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind before you step off on the journey. Now, if you have any pre-existing injuries or issues, you need to make sure you go back to the Unlocking Your Movement Masterclasses that we have available, or go and see an adequately qualified professional to get those issues sorted out before you begin. As we're progressing into some pretty advanced movements, we want to avoid injury at all costs. So with our back bridge, we need to focus on things like wrist mobility, thoracic mobility, shoulder stability, and hip extension. So if we've got any issues there, I'll show a couple of little drills that you can help improve it. But if there's any issues that we've had for a considerable amount of time or any risk factors there, I want you to stop, refer yourself out, get those things sorted, and then you can progress along your journey. Welcome to step one of the back bridge. Now, before we begin, we're going to need really good wrist mobility, great shoulder stability, thoracic mobility, and hip extension to be able to get into the correct position for our full back bridge. So if we can't achieve those things right now, if we feel like we've got to address a few issues before we begin, drop back to those Unlocking Your Movement Masterclasses, because we won't be able to get into position, or we might be pushing ourselves close to injury, and we want to avoid that. But here's step one of our back bridge, and we're going to go for 2 sets and 15 reps apiece before we move on to the next stage. So the first stage is all about hip extension and reaching hip extension. So from a laying position, we want to be driving those hips up. A little bit different to a standard hip bridge, but we're conducting 15 bridges where we're aiming on really pushing those hips through as high as we can. So we're pushing hips to the roof, squeezing glutes as high as we can, driving up. 15 reps, 2 sets, and that's step one. Tricks to note if you've got hip extension problems, we can test that by laying on our stomach. Now from here, we should be able to extend our hip nice and high like so. So because we're going into that back bridge where we're going to require past 90-degree hip extension, if we can't get our leg comfortably to 30 degrees, we might need to do some work. So going back to things like our couch stretch and other hip extension mobility exercises will help increase that hip extension or hip range of motion. Step two of the back bridge. Now we're going for 2 sets of 10 reps of our straight bridge variety. Now this is all about starting to get that shoulder in a condition to be able to get into that back bridge. So there's going to be a couple of variations we can try and feel out in order to make sure we've got the right shoulder mobility and stability before we push to the more advanced level. So straight bridge, we're going to start in a seated position, legs extended, hands behind us with our fingers pointing away. And what we're going to do is drive up into position here. Okay, so the idea is squeezing the shoulder blades together, extending through the hips, so improving from that hip bridge that we did in step one, driving up into position, coming back down. So you might feel a bit tight through the thoracic, or you might feel your chest tight. We need to get in and mobilize those areas if we feel like there's any stops or things restricting our movement there. The next level is our straight bridge with our fingers facing towards us, and we're pushing up into position here. So you might even feel this through the biceps, through the wrists. You've got to target those mobility stretches to suit, and we're simply conducting 10 reps, pushing up, emphasizing the squeeze of the glutes, pinch of the shoulders, nice and tall into position here. Another regression or another test element we can use in our straight bridge is our back bridge transition. So we're going to start on our all fours here, and we are simply going to transition over and push to the roof. So we're extending through this downed arm, nice and tall, driving hips up and extending through the spine as well, trying to push to the roof. If we can't get into here comfortably, we need to either mobilize what's stiff or regress as appropriate. So 2 sets, 10 reps, straight bridge, try that back bridge transition each arm. Make sure you're nice and stable on that extended position before we bump into level 3. All right, level 3, the back bridge. We are going for a bench bridge, and the sets and reps we're aiming for is 2 sets of 5 reps. Now, this is probably the first point we're really going to start to challenge our wrist mobility. So let's go through a couple of quick wrist mobility stretches we can do to warm ourselves up for the effort so we can get into position. All right, so we're going to start on all fours, and we're going to have those wrists facing back towards ourselves. And we're simply going to start rocking back and forth, keeping those elbows locked. The heel of the palm is staying on the floor, so we're not peeling up, and we're pushing in. Once we hit that bit of tension there, bit of stiffness, we're going to sit and breathe through the movement. And once we feel that release, we're going to drop a bit deeper. Okay, so obviously we're going to be loading our wrists in this manner for our back bridge, so it's important to spend some time there. If you can wriggle into position here, and then once we sit there for about 2 minutes, we're going to go to an elbow bend. So breathing through the movement, flexing at the elbows here. If you've had tennis elbow or golfer's elbow, this sometimes can get aggravated a little bit, but what that is from the wrist or the shoulder being not quite stable and the elbow having to do the work. So if we do have some of those issues, we want to slow it right down and don't push into pain and regress to our mobility masterclasses if we need to. And once we've been here for about 2 minutes or so, we're going to go for that single arm wrist mobility exercise. So hands in the middle of the body in that center line here. The 4 fingers stay planted on the floor and we're peeling that wrist back, getting that elbow to the floor. We might only be able to get to elbow just off the floor without those fingers peeling. That's okay. We're going to sit here and breathe and get that elbow to the floor without these 4 fingers moving. And then coming out after about 2 minutes, and same on the other side. Okay, so that's our wrist mobility serial, Now we're going to go on to a bench bridge. Now this is going to help get us into hip extension and then also involves some thoracic work as well. So we'll go through our bench bridge, remembering keeping the weight off the neck. Weight stays off the neck at all times. You should literally just be in contact with the bench with your head, but lightly and ever so touching. So if you feel yourself loading up and bearing weight on your head, we need to stop and adjust position. So the setup position for our bench bridge, we're going to be on our back with our hands like so. Now that's where this wrist mobility is really going to start challenging on the bench. So we want to be in a position where we can get our hands just above our shoulders into position here, and we're pushing up off the bench. Coming out of it under control. Now you can see there, you're not going to get to full arm extension. This is basic loading of the wrists and also getting into that thoracic extension and hip extension like we need. So we're going to go through 2 sets of 5 there, where you should be able to come out onto the bench, then back up before we progress to the next level. So let's take another quick look at that. So a setup, hands just above the shoulders, fingers around the bench. If we don't quite have that range, that's kind of handy. Pushing up, coming back down. Pushing up, holding the position, and coming out nice and easy. So fingers around the bench. If you don't quite have that wrist mobility yet, you should be doing those wrist mobility exercises before you start anything like this, keeping the weight off the head, staying nice and safe throughout. Step 4, the back bridge, 2 sets, 5 reps before we progress, but we are going to go for a head bridge. Now we're going to start this on the bench though. You would have seen in step 3, we're starting to require a bit more thoracic mobility, and before we get to the floor, we want to make sure we free up that T-spine to give us a chance to get into that correct position. So the dumbbell pullover, one of my favorite exercises for this, and you'll see very quickly why it is so useful. Laying on a bench, head nice and relaxed here, guys. We don't want to take any tension. Arms extended, dumbbell like so above the face. Now, as we drop down into the movement, our hips will drop and those arms will go over our head. Our first level though is simply letting those arms go, hips staying in position. Now, the full pull over here, we're dropping hips and driving back up through the glutes. So as you can see, we're gaining that thoracic mobility, that we'll need throughout the movement. Okay, dumbbell pullover, about 10 to 15 reps before you get into this head bridge drill. Now this is going to start to work our position for our full back bridge. So focus on being able to get into position first. If you can't get into position, work wrist mobility, thoracic mobility, shoulder stability, and then hip extension to get us open before we start practicing this. So head bridge. Remembering from step 3, keeping the weight off the neck or the head at all times. It should just be in contact with the floor and nothing else. If you feel like you're resting too much weight on it, you're not doing it right. So feet shoulder width apart or just outside, hands in that starting position. So just above the shoulders. And then from here, we're going to tip, extend through the thoracic and the hips and look behind ourselves and just keep our head just off the floor. Here's a quick demo. And coming out under control. So we're going to go for 5 reps, 2 sets. This is really going to load up the wrists and it's also going to start to test that thoracic mobility and shoulder stability. So make sure you take it nice and easy. If you only get 3 controlled reps out, come back the next week, try it again, let it improve over time. So let's have a look at what a couple of reps together will look like. And there you have it, guys. Under control the whole time, nice and easy. Make sure you don't ramp up too quickly on these. Small bits, ever so slightly, over the long term will help you get into range and be nice and safe in position. All right, step 5, the back bridge. We're gonna go for the full version this time. Now remembering we've earned the sets and reps of the previous 4 levels before we give the back bridge a go. Now, quick points to remember, make sure the weight is evenly distributed across the hands and the feet, and trying to get to that full elbow lock is the end range of the position. But we'll show you a couple of different angles as we go into the back bridge, and then ultimately we should be in a nice comfortable position where we're not too weighted on the feet or too weighted on the hands. So set up position. Feet just outside shoulder width apart, knees are bent, making sure we're not too close or too far away. Hands now, if we have to rock into position, that's okay too. Once we got our hands on the floor, it's driving up to the roof. There you go. So if we find ourselves weighted too much on the feet or the hands, it's all about maintaining that distance apart or finding that sweet spot. And then we can also shift our weight back and forth a little bit till we find that end range that's comfortable for us, where we can get to full hip extension, extend through the thoracic, and then also maintaining that nice even weight shift.